Good morning and welcome to Santos on Sports. We're all battered and bruised this morning, but we are here as we are going to talk sports along with Chris. I am Paul. Thank you very much for looking in. We are sponsored happily by Scotty's Pub in Fall River, Citywide Glass with 3 locations in Fall River, Taunton, and Dartmouth, Lakeville Athletic Club in Lakeville, and Attorney John Seed in New Bedford. Give us a call at 774-762-6234. Just from different texts and different feelings that we got. We had a lot of aggravated people going back and forth last night after that 28-5 embarrassing beatdown of the Red Sox last night. Chris, that was just horrendous and embarrassing.
Oh, pretty much so. Does that count as 2 games with that score, 28? Is that 2 losses?
Luckily, one game at a time. One game at
a time. All right. I understand. Coming off the All-Star break, Paul, you would think, battered and bruised as the Red Sox were, maybe an opportunity to relax themselves, get their thoughts in, think about, hey, what we have to do in 68 games left. How can we turn this around? How can we still be a wild card contender? How can we get back to, Red Sox baseball? But this is a good opportunity for our viewers to call in, and I hope people call in. Are you buyers or are you sellers on the Boston Red Sox with what's left, 68 games, and you are right now 3 games back of the wild card? And what would you do at the trade deadline, as you see in our picture right here, where you are at? Cleveland in front of you, Toronto, Seattle, and of course, Tampa on top. Are you willing to pack it in right now? And are you willing to come back and say, no, we're not dead yet. We still got some time. We can turn this around. Trevor Story, hopefully coming back soon. Rich Hill, Michael Walker, 2 other players, hopefully coming back. Or do you sit back and say, nah, this is not working out. We need to make some moves. We got to get going. Schwarber, obviously, remember when you had him. Renfroe, 60 homers between them. Dahlback and JBJ replacing. Now only 8 home runs between the 2 of them. Yeah, you add in Story with all his money. He's got about 15, I believe. And so think about, and you take that into account, but you spent a lot of money on Trevor Story. So could you have used some of that money somewhere else to make this a lot more depth for the Red Sox instead of really fighting now? But let us know what you think. Give us a call, 774-762-6234. I think there's a lot of people out there, Paul, that say, I don't see them really doing anything in these last 68 games. It's going to be interesting.
Well, we only have to look back to last year, right? How many times did we talk the same way as we're talking right now? They're dead and buried, they're going nowhere. They stink. They should do this. They should do that. And then all of a sudden they snuck into that playoff. And the next thing you know, they got within a game or 2 of going to the World Series. Now they got hot at the right time and, teams got knocked off that maybe shouldn't have. And those kind of things don't happen all the time. But, the thing that worries me isn't that. I mean, if they were still in the wild card, actually qualifying for the wild card if the season ended today, I would feel a little bit differently. But what bothers me, again, going back to that screen, you see that 3rd column on the right. They are now 3 games behind of the 3rd wild card. So now you got to jump over Cleveland. You got to make sure that Chris Santos, Baltimore, isn't sneaking down your back there. And right behind the Red Sox, also tied with Baltimore, is the Chicago White Sox, also 4.5 games out in the wild card. So now you got to flip over Cleveland. Cleveland's got a decent team managed by Terry Francona. And then you got to worry about Toronto and Seattle, good teams. And then you got Tampa Bay up there. And then, of course, the Yankees out of sight. So you got a lot of good teams that you got to fight with to get that last wild card. So, if you're going to go and say, well, this one year, maybe we can sneak in there and do some damage. But what are the chances of really winning the whole thing versus like, okay, maybe you trade J.D. Martinez, whose contract is up. Rafael Devers, of course, coming up. Bogart's coming up. On the other hand, if you take them all and you clean house, oh boy, now you're kind of like, now you're like back at the drawing board. Now you're way back at the bottom of the barrel again. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I really have mixed feelings about it. Unfortunately, I think if the Red Sox had done some moves before now, maybe like 30 days ago, to give some of these players some confidence because,
Mhm.
Bogarts, hey, he wants you to open the bank for him. These guys always want to open we just want $1 million a week, because that's what the market says and all that stuff. That's true. That's true. They want what the market will bear. But on the other hand, a guy like Bogarts, he's been here, he's taking less money, he wants to stay here. And the negotiations have been pretty weak. The Red Sox give these weak offers. So now he's probably playing in the back of his mind like, this team isn't going anywhere. He says that they are. He says they have a good team. He wants to stay here, but maybe it kind of affects your performance a little bit when you think that this is the end of the line. You know what I mean? There's a lot of psychological stuff going on there.
Yeah, I agree with that. And at being 3-7 in your last 10, but the bigger one at 12-27 in your division, almost tells me that you would have to almost go, depending on whatever's left, like 30-0 against everybody else because you haven't been that good in your division. They have to find a way to just worry about their own division. And think about 12-27. I'm not saying it would be reversed, but if you could get at least half of that, you'd be right back in the picture very easily. So they have struggled in their own division, and they know it. And so, do you put some of the blame on that on Cora himself? I know people have to go out and play the game, and you put them in positions, but we've seen some real suspect baseball from the Red Sox, especially defensively. There's been some struggles there, and they really need to make some moves. So, first base, outfield, obviously, even starters and bullpen really need a lot of work to get them maybe in contention for the wild card. And then if you make the moves, as you say, Paul, I'm a guy that's a firm believer that you got to have some backbone players that you live by. And if it's Devers and Bogarts as the two guys, I get it. Now, you went out and got Story, so you have to keep him. I think Vasquez is a pretty good, solid player that you would have to try to hold on to. But after that, I'm trying to find something. Probably Verdugo. I would probably stick with him. He's kind of that dirt dog grinder kind of player. But from after that, I think there's a lot of moves with Dahlbeck and JBJ and JD and some of them other players that you might be able to say, nah, this just isn't working here and try to go. So it becomes obviously contracts. It becomes a money issue. And that's why the guys get paid the big bucks to figure all this out, to put the best team out on the field. And that's what Cora's, I think, has been asking for in the last month. And the Sox have done nothing. There's only one move I've heard. Dominic Smith out of the Mets, a first baseman. That's the only guy that I've heard's name mentioned that maybe could come to Boston. Other than that, I haven't heard one thing about the Red Sox doing anything to make moves.
And how about that game last night? Somebody give me a call at 774-762-6234 and talk about that game last night. Now, of course, one game doesn't make a season. You can have that one game. Some of the players are talking about last night, like, hey, during the course of my career, I was involved in a game like that one way or the other and so forth. But think about some of the things that happened in that game. How about that inside the park grand slam? That was an embarrassing moment, not only because, I don't know, they talk about Fenway Park at, dusk. It's hard to pick up the ball. That's been the case for, for 100 years. And balls are just dropping in there. I lost that one. Oh, I lost another one. Oh, we lost another one, And then on top of that, not only is it inside the park grand slam, which began when the ball was lost in the air by center fielder Jared Duran, after the ball bounced behind him, he didn't even bother going back to get the ball. He just turned around and went, oh, okay, well, Verdugo's coming to get it, so I'm not even going to bother to get it. Now, one thought might be that he looked and he saw that the left fielder was going to get there before him, so he figured, well, I'll just, get out of the way or whatever. But he didn't even, make any kind of attempt. It was a bad optic to just watch the ball drop in and have him turn around and go, to hell with it. He's going to get it, And then how about the pop-up in the infield? How many times have we seen this? This has happened more than once. It doesn't like it just happened once and that was it. This keeps happening. Guys looking, the catcher's looking at the first baseman looking at the catcher. All of a sudden, plop, right in the middle of the infield. It's like, oh my God, I'm down at the Little League field over here. What the heck is going on? So there is sort of like a falling apart thing that feels like it's happening. That mental part of the game where the thing is falling apart. It's the roof is leaking and the roof is collapsing. And once that feel happens, you go from like, hey, you're the top wild card. And just a few weeks back, they were the top wild card for a
Yeah.
while. And then it was like the second wild card, the third wild card. Now they're 3 games out. It feels like a sinking ship. And once that mentality enters the team, that's when you start seeing mistakes like that.
Yeah, Paul, and not just last night. This has been going on now for a few weeks here with the Red Sox, with a lot of errors, a lot of mental mistakes. We saw it with Verdugo. We've seen it with Dahlback. We've seen some situations. Cora has tried to make some moves. He made another one last night, moving Vasquez into the field and getting him out from the catch and put Policki there. So, he's trying to do some things to sit back and say, how can we shape this up a little bit and play some good, hard baseball. And he's even talked about it in his interviews. He's mentioned Tampa, how hard they play, and he wants to get his club playing that hard, not obviously offensively, but more defensively to, settle the ship, ride the ship, make sure you got it the way you want it, and force teams to beat you and sit back and say, okay, well, maybe our starters and our bullpen is where we need to be. So when you're helping that out, and your given runs away, as we saw in the last few weeks, it really deteriorates. And then it's true, as you just said, how it funnels one right after the other. And you're like, well, finally, we're going to solve this. And it just doesn't happen. And it continues to just unfold. And fortunately for Boston, it really is right now in this last month.
Well, you mentioned it before, Alex Cora had said during the break, hey, it's the All-Star break. We'll have a chance to regroup. We'll make some adjustments. We'll take a look at our at-bats. We'll do this and we'll do that. And then the first game back, not only do they get pummeled, that was the most runs ever allowed by a Red Sox team in their history.
Wow.
The Red Sox have been around for since what, about 1890 or something? I don't even know how far they go back, right? So that means every game that anybody's ever seen, our generation, our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, never gave up 28 runs before. And right here, we do have an opening comment, a shot across the bow from Lucas Ferreira.
Yes.
Who says, "Go Orioles."
Yeah, that's a boy, Lucas.
That's a nice little getting in the good graces of Chris Santos, a big Orioles fan. He also says, "Go Mariners." He also says, "Go Mets." And then he says, "Blow it up. Red Sox ownership should be ashamed of the product that they've put on their field."
Well, I can't disagree with him in that statement. I think there's a lot to. Obviously, we don't know behind the scenes and how all that works for us as just outsiders looking in. We try to say, hey, this is what they're producing on the field. But you have to agree with him to sit back and say, I think there is a better product that the Sox could have put out there starting this year compared to what they have on the field right now. So I agree with Lucas wholeheartedly. As an Orioles fan and how I'm trying to bring up the organization, trying to bring out the players from the minors, maybe make a move here and there and see if it all works out. And the young kids are trying to put it together. They're trying to make a run. But for the Sox, when you have a budget, Paul, and you spend money like that, I mean, right at the top of the tier, and we've seen this before, number one, Boston Red Sox, when you put everything together, what it costs just to go to that ballpark. When you talk parking, tickets, food, all that, they give you an average. Boston's number one, and you put all them games and the money that they make and how they do it. You put all that together, and people want to see the product when they go to a game or watching it, if they're paying that much. And right now, they need to find a way to right the ship.
Well, we did have one comment by, let's see, a woman by the name of Dawn DaCosta. Actually, it's not a comment. She simply put up the laughing emoji and just kind of put that up there.
Well, listen, I just hope she's not laughing at us and she's laughing at the Red Sox.
Exactly. Could be both, actually.
It could be. It could be.
All
Let's
right.
hope not, though.
Good morning. You're on Santos on Sports.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Words can't even describe the feeling right now. Just like I was telling you yesterday and a couple of other people. Words cannot describe just how pathetic that performance was last night. I even went as far as to say that the Sox should be disbanded and wiped from the history books after that performance last night.
We have a very upset Red Sox fan here.
Yes.
I don't know what to think of this. I don't know what to think in terms of, like, is this signaling that, the Sox might be sellers at the deadline? Because it seems like from all the rumblings that they really don't want to pay Bogarts. They really don't want to pay Rafi Devers. Are they just gonna sell off these guys sooner or later? Because I am Bloom coming from that old Tampa culture. They just want to cheap out when it comes to big players. Just rely solely on the prospects. I don't know what to think of that in terms of the future, but just for right now, God, this team has been pathetic these past couple of months. Really
Been tough to watch.
A franchise record, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, I was actually kind of disappointed at that outcome. I kind of wanted to see the Blue Jays put up 30 the way that they were going.
Oh, it's funny that you say that. I caught the last couple innings with my wife, and I said, I hope they get up to like 35 or something. I wanted, once it got to that point, just keep on going. And I'm a Red Sox fan.
Well, I was laughed. I was getting text messages and saying, well, at least the Red Sox put up a field goal, and then I had 4 touchdowns, and so I was quite laughing about it too. But Carlo, what would you like to see the Red Sox do? I know it's tough to tell and the different contracts, but if you're in that organization, what would you like to see the Red Sox do moving forward with Bogarts, Devers, or with, leaving it alone and picking up here and there? What would you like to see them do?
Are you there, Ryan?
Oh,
Ryan,
you
there?
were talking to me. I thought you were talking.
No, Ryan. No, Ryan. I'm talking to you. What would you like to see the Red Sox do?
To be honest, I'd like to see them. I would have, instead of going out and getting Trevor Story, I would have used any of that leftover to at least try and keep Rafi Devers around.
Okay.
Bogarts, I could kind of understand if you moved on, because he's kind of the older of the two, and Rafi Devers is a young and up and coming superstar in this league. You try to lock him up. Considering that this is one of the bigger markets in baseball, you really should be able to afford both of those guys. But I think that they're at least going to try to keep Rafi Devers around because of how young he is. But seeing the reports of the first offer that they made him was like, I forgot what it was, like 6 years, 168 million or something like that, something ridiculous, and he kind of just scoffed at the offer. So I'd like to see them at least keep one of those guys, preferably Devers, because of how young he is. But I'm not having much faith that they'll keep either, to be honest.
Let's go back to what you said earlier, Ryan. Do you think the Red Sox, and I see this happening, do you think the Red Sox, when they went get Trevor Story, was this like a chess match? So some other team, like the Yankees or some other big club, doesn't go get him, and they sat there and said, I think we better, because look what he could do somewhere else. And then they spend that money just to get that guy. So they take him away, whether they want him or not, and use it. And they say, let's go do it. Because I think teams do that.
I think they do that as well. And, that could be entirely true. But to be perfectly honest with you, I think they could also use that signing as possible leverage in the Xander Bogaerts talks. Because you have to remember, this was a guy who was at least an all-star once playing shortstop. So they might look, Chaim Bloom and the organization might look at that, and Bogarts say, well, if you really don't want to agree to our terms, that's fine. We got an all-star shortstop already. So I'd hate to think that's what they're doing, but the way that they're going, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that's the case.
Even though the Red Sox spend the most money and they're a big market team and all that, it almost seems like it's a shot by the owners, trying to almost say to the players, you guys are getting a little too greedy here. I mean, some of these contracts, how about that $400 million contract that was offered by one of the teams? You really got to lay out. They want these 10-year deals at, $40 million a year and all that. And, we've talked about it before. I mean, you give it to Mike Trout And, that doesn't really make the team better, because baseball, you need a lot of people to make a team do well enough to get to the World Series and win the World Series. Basketball is probably the one sport where one guy can make the biggest amount of difference. So what about the school of thought? Now, look, John Henry has money coming out of his rear end, right? So, I mean, he could pay the money. They could pay the money, no problem at all. For whatever reason, they don't want to pay the money. On the side of the players now, have the players gotten a little bit too greedy? You know what I mean? I mean, why can't the Red Sox get to Devers, Bogarts, Martinez and say, look, we'll give all three of you 80% of the market if you want to all stay here. That way we can win. You know what I mean? Like these guys are getting a little too greedy too, aren't they? What do you think, caller?
I think you hit the nail on the head. You see guys like, Mike Trout's contract it's absolutely ridiculous. I don't know if you looked at all into like what's the guy's name who's about to get traded? Juan Soto. I guess he turned down like a $440 million.
Right, that's the guy I was talking about. Yeah,
for 15 years.
The Nationals, which was absolutely ridiculous. And so not only are you turning down that big of money, these apparently who knows who's going to throw that much money at him elsewhere after a trade or something like that. And you had mentioned before, John Henry does have money coming out of his rear end, so you think that they would be able to pay all these guys. But you also have to remember he owns a soccer club. He owns the Pittsburgh Penguins now, so it kind of makes you think: is he really that committed to making the Red Sox a World Series team?
By the way, that's one of Chris's teams too. The Pittsburgh Penguins.
That's
that,
correct.
Right?
Oh, I actually did not know that. Nice.
That's true. I am a Penguin fan, and don't forget. Now you have LeBron on your side too, who obviously thinks that the city of Boston is racist, but at the same time, he owns part of the Red Sox. So quite interesting to see what he feels. But let's go back to even like the movie Moneyball. Thought it was very interesting about how analytics came into play, and it takes away the money issue and how much you should pay for each player in situations. So if you ever get a chance to see that movie, which I'm sure a lot of people have, but if you haven't, check that movie out, Moneyball. Really good story of how Billy Beane put together the Athletics and what John Henry wanted to do with him afterwards in some of these other franchises to say, hey, let's go by what he's talking about, and how analytics and money issues can find a way to make up a 9 to 10 position roster out on the field and with some pitches, and do it the right way, where we don't have to spend the money like Mike Trout is getting or what Juan Soto wants. And as Paul said, not all that for one guy. We need it for a team, and how we can fit that in to be a contender in a ball club. So great movie to see. I thought it was one of the best ones.
On top of that,
I actually watched.
I was just going to say, opening the bank for the one guy doesn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, I always go back, and I know it's going back a few years, the Yankee teams of the late 90s, where you had 6, 7, 8 players that all batted about 260, 270. They all hit between 15 and 20 home runs. They all could play the field. It's kind of like 8 Derek Jeters, or whatever. You had Paul O'Neill and Bernie Williams, and none of them were like 45 home run hitter. You know what I mean? They're all like, 18, 20 home runs. The game's a little different now, but still, you're better off with 7 or 8 of those guys than you are one guy that hits 50 home runs and nobody else can do anything else, right? So is that what you're saying, Ryan, about Moneyball?
Yeah, and they're doing it right now, Paul. Look what they're doing right now. Their top hitter is Aaron Judge. He's batting about maybe 285. Everybody else is 270 and below, but yet they're hitting the ball all over the place, and they got such a commanding lead in the East. And so they found the players that maybe, besides Judge and maybe Stanton, after that, they found the players that can really do damage, and maybe it's but they're one of the higher payrolls in baseball as well.
Right, and you do have a couple of guys that can really blast the ball out of the park. But yeah, Ryan, you commented on the Moneyball. You really enjoyed that movie?
I did. I actually, it's funny you would mention that. I watched that in my senior year of high school in a statistics class. Absolutely fantastic movie. And you mentioned Aaron Judge earlier. He's been absolutely ridiculous, an MVP candidate this year. There's a risk that the Yankees are going to lose him in free agency.
Right. Yeah.
Crazy even to hear that. But That's the way the organizations work. And unfortunately, that's how baseball is now. So anything can happen and anybody can go anywhere. So it will be interesting to see what they do with him. But I think how they've put it together with the players, hitting 1 through 9, maybe one guy that doesn't take the ball out of the park that much, but everybody else can really hit the ball out of the park whenever they want. And nothing against it, but Yankee Stadium on that right side. I mean, I think Paul Santos could hit one out of that ballpark on that right side. He just stick the bat out and the thing looks like it's going. So, that helps them along the way too. But they still got to hit. But they've improved their pitching just as well. And they found some guys from their farm system who have stepped up, and especially a couple of starters, and obviously the back of that bullpen where Chapman is not even a closer anymore. They got Holmes and a couple other guys that can really, shut down teams. So they've really put it. If they don't make the World Series, I'll be shocked. It will be a very disappointing season for Yankee fans if the Yankees are not in the World Series. I can tell you that.
All right, so Ryan, before you go, let's say you're the general manager of the Red Sox, and these are the standings right now. The Red Sox are 3 games out of the 3rd wild card. Okay, 3 games out of the 3rd wild card. We're about a week and a couple of days away from the trade deadline. What does general manager Ryan do?
First and foremost, get a Josh Bell, get a competent first baseman.
Mm-hmm.
It's been ticking me off so much.
Oh, wait a minute, so you're a buyer.
He's a buyer.
I, as a general manager, am a buyer. I don't think that Chaim Bloom wants to be a buyer.
All
I
right.
think his mentality is completely different. But I look at the fact that you're a few games away from a wild card spot. You're a few roster players on the roster away from really being something, I would think. But you just have some holes. Probably the biggest one for the past couple of years has been first baseman, because Bobby Dahlbeck clearly hasn't been the answer. Franchi Cordero isn't a competent baseball player, let alone a true first baseman. So get yourself a true first baseman. Maybe go get yourself another outfielder in case Kike Hernandez doesn't fully recover, and hopefully that you turn into something. But man, the first base situation, it's been absolutely ridiculous.
All right, Ryan, we really appreciate the call. Thank you very much for calling in.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
All right.
Thanks,
Ryan.
Ryan.
All right, so Ryan's still a buyer. I understand that too, because I'm a diehard. I never, my team could be down 3 games to none, and I'm glued to the TV like maybe this is the one time they come back, and of course it happened that time with the Red Sox. But all the times the Bruins have been down 3 games to none, or wherever, my team can be in the deepest hole, and I'm there like, well, maybe this could happen, or maybe that could happen, or, I just won't give it up. You know what I mean? Well, think about last year, right? You talk about the Yankees, right? If they don't go to the World Series, it'd be a disappointment. The only thing I would be worried about if I was a Yankees fan is that, and it happens more in hockey than it does in any other sport, but it can happen in baseball too. You can just pile up these numbers all year and everything's just going great. And I know you have all the players and everything else, but, suppose the team just kind of cools off. They go into a little slump the last couple of weeks of the season, which can happen. I've seen it happen before. You and I have been watching these games for a long time, right? I remember the great Red Sox teams back in the 70s that were on fire. All of a sudden, they all went into a slump the last week and they fell apart, right? And actually lost the Orioles a couple of times down the stretch. But, teams can go into slumps and people can get injured. And all of a sudden, you're in some wild card game. Like now, last year, they had the 1 wild card. This year, it's a 3-game series at the, so by the time you get to the team that won the division, they can lop over the wild card. But like last year with the Yankees, I mean, they had a great year and then 1 game, see you later, So a lot can go wrong in the playoffs, even if you're the better team. So again, they're playing great. Everything's pointing in their direction. They may go on and win the whole thing, but not necessarily either. Look what happened with the Braves last year.
Yeah, and today's the 23rd, Paul, and you got until August 2nd, as they say, the trade deadline and moves and things like that. So with only 3 games out and 68 left, that's why a lot of people say we'll be buyers and try to make that wild card. But in this next week right here, let's say you go another 2-5, in those 7 days, or you went 1-6. Now, instead of being 3 games out, you're down to 7 or 8 games out. Now it's just let loose and probably, be sellers. So this next week gives you a lot of play to say, hey, wait a minute, what are we going to do here? And I don't know if the Red Sox are going to hold off as long as they can to see how this really unfolds in this next week, to see where they're at right before that to make those moves. But how much long can you wait is the question, because there's going to be some guys out there, and other teams might want them as well. It's going to be an interesting week for Boston.
Yeah, especially with the 3-game behind on the wild card.
Yeah, right now.
I mean, a week from now, if it's 5 or 6 games, okay, then I think, it's hard to say that you're going to hang in there. On the other hand,
Correct.
if 2 or 3 days from now they're back tied for the last wild card, that's totally different. But yeah, you're right. As the clock keeps ticking, the pressure keeps mounting.
Well, it does, because other teams are going to obviously looking to improve their teams too. So they're going to make offers, or they're going to make moves, and how much more can you make? Does that mean Baltimore tries to make a move? Does that mean, Cleveland tries to make a move or right there? Toronto looks pretty, solid right where they are. So you got to watch out for these other teams that are trying to do the same thing. And so how much longer can you wait before you really need to pull the trigger?
All right, we did have another comment over here. The comment was from Mike Massaro. He says the coach needs to get on those players that made those errors, so when these incidents happen, they can react differently. And then he was also glad to hear that some frustrated Red Sox fans are starting to root against the Red Sox.
Well, there's a lot of fans around here, obviously, that can go both ways. But I think there's a lot of frustration of what they've seen out on the field, Paul, more than anything else. And when you make simple errors, when you make poor decisions, when you have mental breakdowns as professional ball players, that's what fans don't want to see. Whether you're not hitting or you're not pitching, but when you do that, that really deteriorates as a fan to say, what are we putting out there? What the heck is going on? And we need to make moves and right the ship. And right now, for the last 2-3 weeks, the Red Sox have been very poor defensively and mental breakdowns during some of these games that have cost them a few of those games as well.
All right, let's go back to the phones. Good morning. You are next on Santos on Sports.
What's going on, guys? Thanks for taking my call. This is one of just the most tragic Red Sox seasons that I've seen in quite some time, just because of how much money that you have to put into going into a game. I mean, if you bring a family, it's the cost of a vacation. You can probably catch plane tickets and stuff right now cheaper than going to the Red Sox to sit on the first base side. And for the product that's on the field, it's just downright unacceptable. I mean, you're looking for power from a corner outfield spot in first base. Oh, who's this guy named Kyle Schwarber that has 30 home runs who's from Massachusetts? Oh, well, couldn't sign him. So instead, you take an outfielder and put him at first base, and you take a second baseman and put him in right field, and they both look lost. You have a first baseman who can't make contact to save his life. You're paying $9 million a year to a guy who can barely make contact himself, who's supposed to be a good defensive player, but hits so poorly that they can't play him, in Jackie Bradley. I mean, I would say blow it up if I was the general manager, but they're still going to charge somebody an arm and a leg and having to sell a vital organ just to buy a ticket to a game. So what good is it to blow it up if you can't even afford to go to the game? You know, if they were to lower ticket prices and the price of beer and, reset the payroll, I'm totally okay with that. You'll get prospects back. It's been done before, and they'll do it again. But if they're going to continue to charge the prices they do for the product that's on the field, it's just downright unacceptable.
Well, let me read this to you because I have it on my phone. Total cost for 4 tickets, 4 hot dogs, 2 beers, 2 sodas, and parking averages $325 for the family. That's the average. Number 1 in Major League Baseball, the Boston Red Sox. Right there, the cost for a family to go to a baseball game and averages $325. And that is what I included with the 4 tickets, 4 hot dogs, 2 beers, 2 sodas, and parking. And even parking says $23.50. No offense, I've been to Fenway Park, and I'm not paying $23.50 for parking. I'm paying a lot more than that. So I like to know where they got that from. But they are number one in Major League Baseball and what it costs to go with a family to a baseball game.
Well, you can pay cheaper if you want to walk from the Deaconess, all the way down to Fenway.
Yeah. Not when I got kids and they don't want to walk.
Well, I want to ask the caller too, because I guess, we have to look forward because this is where we are. But when you think back about it, imagine if they had just re-signed Schwarber and didn't do anything else, just signed him. Where would they be? There's a good chance they'd be like 4 or 5 games up where they are now, and they'd be right in the thick of the thing. And now here they are looking up 3 games to the wild card.
Yeah, I think some of the pitching, they've been poor in their decisions and who to sign for pitching. The bullpen's never been right. They've really gotten lucky with the bullpen, even in last year's, where you find a guy like Joe Kelly and Koji Uehara. Like, they've never really put a lot of money into the back end of the bullpen to begin with. But, they've lucked out in that sense. But they still don't have a true closer. Not that it matters because they lose by 25 runs anyways. It doesn't make a difference. But they've never really been true in the back end of the bullpen. They've had guys that have come up that haven't been that good. Bayo obviously needs some more seasoning down there. The Chris Sale contract kind of handcuffs them in whatever pitching they sign or decide to bring into the organization. But yeah, offensively, their lineup is just so poor at the bottom, and defensively, they're giving up way too many runs. I mean, defensive runs saved, they're atrocious. And for them to be that poor on offense, if you're going to be that poor on defense, you better have some guys who can bring it at the plate. I mean, JD Martinez, doesn't he have, single-digit home runs this year? I mean, where's the power threat from that guy? He's supposed to be the middle-of-the-order bat. The 2 guys that are providing the best hitting for you, you're going to let walk into free agency, given the Yankees might lose Judge. Like, when they traded Mookie Betts, you understood that if they're going to trade Mookie Betts and not pay him, they're going to pay somebody. But then to trade Mookie Betts and then not pay either of the next 2 guys that are up in order, especially when Devers is 23, 24, it's a head scratcher. I don't understand what they're doing.
Yeah, and it started with, and injuries is a part of the game, obviously, but going into the season, you're thinking Eovaldi, Sale, Hill, Walker, Pivetta. That's probably your 5. And when you look at it now, only Pivetta is pretty much out there. Yeah, they got Eovaldi back finally. Sale tried, then he gets hurt again. Hill and Walker are still out. So, starting pitching obviously is very important, and they haven't had that rotation that they've wanted. So they made experiments, Whitlock, Houck. They've done all kinds of things. They put some young kids in. At least they haven't sat back. They've tried different situations. They've tried different scenarios, and and unfortunately for them, it just hasn't worked. So they haven't been really able to put it together where they have liked to. Hopefully, in 68 games left, they can try to find that back. Now, obviously, you're not going to get Sale because he'll probably be out forever. But, the rest of them, they got to see what they can. But it is intriguing what you said, what they did with Betts, and then what they did after that, knowing where we could sign maybe and solidify Devers and maybe even Bogarts. So you grab them too, lock that in, see how that goes from there. Getting Verdugo back in that deal, I thought was fine. I had no problem with there. But yeah, I think you're also right. I think it's time to move JD on, let him go, see if he can help somebody, some other team out. He hasn't had the long ball this year. He's declining in age as well. So the pop may not be there as much as it used to. But there's a lot of improvement that the Sox need to make. And hopefully, as Red Sox fans, they can find a way to get it done.
Well, the caller made a good point too, and sometimes we overlook that when we see different things that are happening, especially with defense, and the lineup isn't what it could be in first base, and all those kind of problems. But how can you be a serious contender for a championship without a closer in today's game? I mean, it's impossible. You can't. So right there, you start right off with no bullpen to speak of, right? How can you possibly be successful when the chips are down in a playoff game? You can't.
Go ahead, caller.
Just poor decision making from a baseball point of view. I'm sure business wise they're in the black and it looks fantastic. Hey, we're making money. They're bazillionaires. The more the merrier. but just very poor baseball decisions have been made throughout the last couple of years, especially leading into this one, to where they had to kind of sit on their hands, which is, again, just downright disrespectful to the fan to charge them that much and have to do that. But
all right, very good. We really appreciate your call, and please call again.
thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Santos on Sports, 774-762-6234. So we got, I think, Red Sox fans, and we can probably count Chris and I, not too happy this morning, but we are kind of between a rock and a hard place because some of the poor decisions that have been made in the past have created this situation. The Red Sox really shouldn't be 3 games behind in the wild card if they had just done a couple of basic things over this past year. I mean, they'd clearly be at least in the wild card.
Well, there's a guy out in Colorado, a closer named Daniel Bod, who's actually closing pretty good for Colorado. Yeah. And if you remember, he used to be a Red Sox player. So, here's a guy that came out and said, well, I didn't have success here, and he went somewhere else and has turned it up a little bit too. So, they're trying from the farm system. They gave Dahlback his shot. They're giving Jeter Downs his shot. They went back and got the farmhand of JBJ, giving him his shot. The things are just not working out in those situations there. Duran, Ruff Schneider, still a lot of things happening. And so they're trying to make the best of both worlds with their farm system and the guys they got from other places. Injuries are part of the game. Story's been out, a couple other things with their pitching staff. So the struggles continue for them. But when you have your shot and you have your opportunity, you got to make the most of it. Bill Belichick always says next man up. Well, the Sox have done that and brought their next men up. They just haven't produced.
Speaking of Bill Belichick, we're going to get to the Patriots in just a moment before we sign off. But Alex Cora, I don't think he's really at fault. I mean, if you don't have the players to play, I mean, first base, he's been given what he's been given. All the problems at first base, the bullpen. You can come out and say, okay, I want the right-hander, and the right-hander comes in and gets bombed, or you don't have a closer. You know what I mean? And so maybe the mental part of it, or being ready to play, or the mental part of the game being prepared to play, the team kind of falling apart. Maybe you could say, hey, maybe there's more that he can do, but it's only so much you can do if you don't have the people to play the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah, true. And when those things happen, the first one who's going to take the blame is obviously the head coach and say, well, do you have your team ready to play? So that's why he's going to take the heat when it comes to that, even though he's not out there being the one executing or making the poor mental decisions. But he's trying to say, and he has said it over the last month or 2 months, we need to be better mentally. We need to make less mistakes. We need to play hard baseball and get back to that. So I know he knows it and he wants to, but again, he's not the one that's executing, but he's going to take the blame, Paul, because he's the one that's in charge of the team.
Right, but if you have Bobby Dahlback in your lineup instead of like Aaron Judge, it doesn't matter if it's, Terry Francona or Alex Cora or, whoever it is.
But he still has to try to find a way to get the best out of that player, whether it's offensively or defensively. And then when it doesn't work, how long do you go before you make the change? Right. And so he wasn't in last night, and they moved Vasquez in, got him out of catcher and actually put him in the field and tried that. So, they're seeing the writing on the wall, and it's a matter of how long they want to make the move. So you have to make those tough decisions, but at the same time, you got to get them prepared. So they moved him over to third when Devers was a little banged up and said, okay, let's see how he does there. That didn't work out. That hurt them as well. He made some errors over there too. So that showcase and that showpiece has not been what the Red Sox hoped it would turn out to be. And how long you go with that, who knows? And for me, I'd say no. I would be gone with him by now. I'd put him back down to Worcester, or maybe make a move somewhere to move him. Because to me, I think he's had a lot and enough time to showcase, and it just hasn't worked out.
Well, Chris is always saying that we in New England, fans of Boston, we are very spoiled. Over the last 20 years, having all these championships and everything else. So when things aren't going our way, we get grumpy pretty fast. Well, what I'm thinking is, as a big time Boston sports fan, all four of the major sports teams, I'm thinking to myself, all right, well, if the Red Sox can't sneak into the wild card and make it interesting in the fall like they did last year with all those exciting wild card games and all that kind of stuff, and they just blow it up and sink, and that's the end of the season. Okay, that's going to make kind of a long August. Then we're going to go into September, and yes, here comes the Patriots, right? So right now, Chris, I don't know, man. I'm looking at that Patriots. You know, they say in Bill we trust, greatest coach of all time, blah, blah, blah. But if your defense can't stop anybody, last year the defense was terrible. The offense, they haven't really done a lot to build it up. You pointed out last week about how when ESPN or some of the analysts went through the rosters of every team in the league, the Patriots only have one player that made the top 10 in any position, and it was Hunter Henry, and he was tied for 10th. So even if you're a great coach, I mean, especially where the AFC is, right? I'm looking at this Patriots team and their schedule. Have you seen their schedule? Their schedule is tough. I'm looking at this and say, well, they could win 10 games. They could win 8 games. Yeah, they could also win 6. I mean, some of these games and some of these teams that they're going to play, I mean, I don't know, man. I'm trying to be optimistic. I'm trying to believe in it. I'm trying to say, oh, yeah, well, you know, Bourne was good last year. He's going to be better. And, you know, some of these guys are going to be better. And Mac Jones is going to be better. And he's working out. And they're studying the book. And they, you know, they made the book a little simpler. And, you know, this and that. And I'm still looking at it. I'm like, I don't know, man. I mean, you see him beating Buffalo, for example. They got to play him twice. Miami, they got to open with Miami. I mean, Miami beat him twice last year. I mean, I'm really fearful that this could get ugly.
I actually think that's the way Bill Belichick likes it. He likes to be under the radar. He doesn't like to have that high profile. You know, he had it obviously in Tom Brady, but at the same time, I think he likes to be unknown. He wants to be that kind of coach that says to himself and to his team and organization that I can get the best out of the players that I have. And this is why I drafted them. This is why I picked them up in free agency. This is why I traded for them. And they don't have to be well-known players. They just have to do what I asked them to do. And I truly believe that's the way he likes it. And doesn't want to have all the hype and all the buildup and all that. And just let the playing, you know, do it for us. And so I think he's happy. Even with that ESPN report not being in the top 15 in any position, I think he's thrilled about that because he's going to sit back and say, oh, yeah, watch how I do this and watch how I make these guys better. Now, can he do it with that staff that he has? That's what you're questioning, and you're questioning starts with the defense. But to me, Paul, I think it starts with the offense. When you produce points and you're averaging, let's say, just 17, compared to averaging maybe in the 20s, it's going to make your defense better. It's going to make your defense step up. It's going to make your defense play harder. And that's something that happens when you can't create offensive plays. You can't stretch the field. You can't get points on the board. Now, nothing against Mac Jones, just his first year, and still made the playoffs. Let's see this year, which is supposed to be a better year for him. You know, got the body ready. Arm strength looks great. Throwing the ball all around the field. Still got some pieces to put into place. Devontae Parker, picked up some other guys. Get the 2 tight ends ready. Let's see Stevenson running the ball. Let's get some offense going. Let's get them pumped up. Let's get some points on the board. Then let's see what that defense does and if it shows up compared to what it did last year and folding down the stretch. Now, yes, okay, Paul, not just the New England Patriots are going to improve. These other teams have to improve too, you know. So Miami's gone out and done some things to improve their team. Buffalo's gone out and tried to improve their team and make some pieces of the puzzle too. It's not just sitting back and saying, well, let's just let the Patriots do it and the Patriots do it. Other teams want to get better as well. So it's going to happen. It makes the East a lot better, which I like to see. Makes some parity in that division. Because truth be said, Paul, for 20 years, it's been the New England Patriots in the AFC East, and nobody else has challenged them. Buffalo once in a while during that time. But when them 20 years, you could go into that schedule and go, okay, we start the season 6-0. 2 over Buffalo, 2 over Miami, and 2 over the Jets. And that's something that needs to change. and it's starting to go the opposite way. Now, you've had your runs, and those things happen. It filters. You get your time. You make your changes, and I see that happening right now. So it's find a way to make our team better, and I think it starts with their offense, putting points up on the board, and then see what that defense can hold and get back, because it puts more pressure on the other team's offense when your team is scoring right away and getting a lot of points.
Well, that's a great point. Something that I wasn't really thinking about, because, I'm a big harper on the defense. I'm like, oh, the defense failed them. They needed a stop. They couldn't get that stop. Everybody's talking about the offense, but the psychological, and I know you've done a lot of coaching in football and stuff like that, the psychological thought of, we got to go out there again and make a stop, and then the offense isn't going to do anything when they come out, and then we got to go out.
For 20 years, you've had Tom Brady. When you had Tom Brady for 20 years, you knew that points were going to be put up on the board, so the defense can take chances. Now, okay, we gave up a time. Doesn't matter. We got Tom, and Tom's going to score the next time he gets the ball. And you're averaging 20 to 30 points per game. You didn't do that last year, and you still made the playoffs. So can you regroup on that and get better offensively to help your defense and get your defense strong? And, of course, you had better personnel at that time defensively as well. So think of it as that when you go in, and not solely go in and say, well, can the defense stop anybody? I think you have to make sure you have the best of both offensively and defensively.
I think it's just my frustration in that, there were a number of games where, the Patriots were just hanging right there. And if they just could have got that timely stop in the fourth quarter, and teams that are fairly mediocre, not even Buffalo, but mediocre teams like, the Saints game that I was at, I saw them just march down the field like nothing. And I'm like, wait a minute, I thought this defense was supposed to be something. But you're absolutely right. The defense is going to step up if they know that the offense is going to put up some points. But, I want to ask you something else, right? Bill Belichick, right? He does love the idea of taking, I don't want to say no names, but sort of like these lower level kind of guys, not like the big number guys. And, he made an interesting point, and I kind of picked up on this, and I'm thinking he thinks this all the time. J.C. Jackson, right? He had all these interceptions, right? And then I think somebody asked him about that interception, and he mumbled something like, yeah, well, the ball, got tipped up in the air, and he kind of found him, Basically what he was saying, if you look back at a lot of those interceptions, ball was tipped in the air, Jackson caught it. I'm not saying he didn't play great. I'm not saying he didn't have a great year, but there is some random chance there. There is some luck there that the ball did kind of find him a little bit. And maybe if you give him this big contract and empty the bank out for him, maybe next year the ball doesn't find him as much.
Well, it's almost to say that, even Paul Santos could have caught that tip. You know what I mean? It's something that just happened to float up in the air, and he came running and happened to be right there, and he caught the ball. Now, depends on how those interceptions work. It depends on how he defends. A lot of things go into that. And so at the same time, I look at a guy, because I'm a Cowboy fan, I look at Diggs. Now, Diggs was solid. I think he might have led the league in interceptions, but at the same time, he was giving up touchdowns as well, because he took those chances, and he was a tough defender. And so when you do that, you have the best of both. And so Bill, I think, sits back and say, I got this guy from Rutgers right back over here, and I think he can do even better, because I trained him. He picked up my defense, and he's going to be a better player. And people sit back and say, oh, why did he take that guy? But it fits, according to Bill, his scheme, his devise, his plan, and the way it works. So he's picking his players, which maybe other teams wouldn't take. But yet we've seen Bill look successful in that, and those guys have become all pros. And other times it hasn't worked, and they've fallen off. He gets rid of them, or he doesn't sign it, or whatever. So it's chances you take, but it's your system. This guy's got to fit my system. So, that's how he plays it. But I think he loves to be under the radar. Absolutely loves it.
Well, I don't want to open up that whole Tom Brady, Bill Belichick can of worms again, but, one of the things that just drives me crazy is that the Tom Brady people forget that there was a perfect storm of time where the AFC East sucked. Okay, so now you have arguably, the greatest coach of all time, great quarterback of all time on the same team playing in the AFC East, which is just god awful, which meant that, especially with the system where, you got that bye, the Patriots are one game away from the AFC Championship game every year. And even then, they went 10 years without winning the Super Bowl with Brady and Belichick together, right? Mm-hmm. But that AFC East being terrible. So now here's Tom Brady. He's no dummy, right? So now the AFC is loaded up with all these quarterbacks, all these good teams improving, right? They're all coming over here. And the only one that's left in the NFC, well, basically you got the Cowboys there, of course, with Dak, and you got the Green Bay Packers, right? But other than that, what do you got in the NFC, right? I mean, the division that Tampa Bay's in the NFC, they're not that good. So once again, here's Brady in a nice little comfortable spot in the NFC East with a bunch of trash. And here we are over here now that he's gone. How would Tom Brady be doing against Buffalo twice a year, Miami twice a year? Got to play Cincinnati. Got to play, Patrick Mahomes. Got to play the NFC West. The AFC West, loaded with all those teams, right? I'm not saying he wouldn't do well. He's a great quarterback and everything else, but hey, the red carpet isn't exactly rolled out for you like it was for about 15 of those 20 years either. You know what I mean? There was a perfect storm that happened there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, think about the NFC right now with Green Bay, Tampa Bay, the Rams, and then where do you go from there?
That's it.
I don't know where you go from there after those three teams. And I'm a Cowboy fan, and I'm still not going there. I go with those three teams, and I expect to see them back again. Is there other teams that can step up? Can the Eagles step up? Can the Cowboys step up? Can the Vikings step up? Can the Saints, Seattle? I mean, where are these other teams that are going to step up besides the Rams, Tampa, and Green Bay? Now, when I go to the other way, I can see Denver. I can see the Chargers. I can see Kansas City. Obviously, Buffalo. Maybe the Pats. The Colts. I mean, I can see a lot more happening in the AFC, the NFC. So it's going to be quite interesting how they, when they go with their schedule, when they play the NFC teams compared to the AFC teams, and how well they do. So there might be some other teams out there, obviously, in the AFC that could, can Pittsburgh regroup themselves? A pretty good organization that's always in there. Now that Big Ben's gone, can they find their way to get back too? So I just think a lot more happening in the AFC than the NFC right now. And those are the only three teams that I can actually turn to right now in the NFC.
So isn't it true that like when Brady was in the AFC, the NFC had the better teams and they were like knocking each other off? And then the Patriots would just kind of slide into the Super Bowl. I hate to say it because it's not easy to get the Super Bowl, but you know what I'm saying. Yep. And now it's the opposite. He goes to the NFC where the NFC doesn't really have anybody and the AFC is knocking each other off. Oh, what?
Yeah, it kind of seems that way. That's for sure.
Sakes. I mean, come on, man. I'm a fan of Brady too, but come on, And by the way, they say, well, it's a Brady one and Belichick nothing, and it's Brady. Look, if Brady's surrounded by talent, he wins. If Belichick has talent in his team, he wins. And in the last couple of years, Brady's team is better than Belichick's team. Now, a lot of that has to do with Belichick being the GM and not doing what he could have done as a GM, but it really is the entire team that wins, not just one guy or one coach.
Right, and go to what your philosophy right now is, Paul, and what you've been talking about last year and this year. What's the first thing you're talking about? You're talking about defense. Think about the defense with Tom Brady's team. Think about those players that you had defensively, from Seymour to McGinnis to Ted Johnson. Think about all those great players. Your secondary, the guys that you had when Tom was on offense. It tremendous defensive players that could really help turn the ball over, stop you deep in your end, create turnovers, get Tom on the field at the 40-yard line, 50-yard line, 2 minute. You knew he was getting some points. You knew he was going down. But obviously a great defensive team just as well as the offense. So, that's why it works both ways in my eyes.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank our sponsors, of course. John Seed, attorney at law, 156 8th Street in New Bedford. And you can check out his website at johnseedlaw.com. Lakeville Athletic Club, 325 Bedford Street in Lakeville, where you can play tennis, you can play pickleball, and you can play a whole lot more, too. Citywide Glass, 3 locations to serve you, one at 425 State Road in Dartmouth, additional locations in Fall River and Taunton, and Scotty's Pub, where Chris and I will be meeting for a beer soon at 202
Yes.
Pleasant Street in Fall River. And, we'll catch a Pats game over there, maybe even a Cowboys game, maybe a doubleheader. We'll spend the
Maybe.
afternoon. We'll have our wives come and pick us up after the game. But, hey, I hope you're right. I hope that, nothing would be more satisfying as a Patriots fan, right, than Belichick puts together a good season this year with that great, with that tough schedule, and still be able to get a 10 wins out of that. I mean, to me, that would be like unbelievable. With that schedule that they have, if he could do that, then I think a lot of those detractors, the Belichick detractors, you'd have an argument to make.
Well, training camp, starting right around the corner here. And so you fans can go out there. Obviously, I think it's the Bryant College, watch them a little bit. Hopefully, Paul, we get Karen on as a guest.
Yes.
She'll have some intake of what she's seen from this training camp and talk to Bill Belichick, maybe get some insights from her of what she thinks for the upcoming season. So I want to have her on as a guest, hopefully pretty soon, and try to get the feeling of what it's going to be like this upcoming year for you New England Patriot fans.
When is the next time that the Patriots play the Cowboys? Have you looked that far ahead?
Well, it's usually every 4 years. Am I correct?
Okay, yeah, because you have to rotate through the
You have to rotate around, so it won't be
through
for
the divisions, so it's going to be a few years.
Yes.
Well, you were at that one last year, and I'll tell you, that was a close game, and it went back and forth, and we were texting each other. And then when the Cowboys pulled it off at the end, I said, "Oh boy, I'd like to be a fly on the wall to see Chris Santos jumping up and down in the stands over there."
Then, the next one's going to be in Dallas, and I've actually gone to that when Brady went to Dallas.
Oh wow!
I was at that game, so I happened to see that one as well. So we'll see what it looks like during that time. Maybe I can get back down there again for another showdown. That'd be great.
Road trip to Dallas. That sounds like a good idea.
Done it once, can do it again.
All right. Well, thank you to Chris Santos. I'm Paul Santos. Thanks for the callers today and for the people on the comment line. And we'll talk to you again next week for another Santos on Sports. Have a great weekend. Enjoy this fantastic New England weather.
See you, everyone.